Vrindavan with these four new sannyasis, and you may think, oh, sannyasi must be senior. They were senior, relatively. They had been devotees, most of them, at least 3 years. So they were senior, but they were a bit confused, a lot confused. But anyway, let's see how it unfolds. I think you'll find it interesting and nice, but at least interesting. The Janmashtami Vyasa Puja festival in New Vrindavan had become a nightmare. Hundreds of devotees had converged there from the East Coast, with many others from California and even Europe. Whew. They had come for a blissful festival, but instead had found Srila Prabhupada's newly initiated sannyasis expounding a devastating philosophy. The sannyasis speaking informally to groups here and there. Well, I can also mention, we read about yesterday one Kartikeya Swami. Do you remember? Anyway, Kartikeya Swami. I think shortly after this, means shortly after being given sannyas, he left sannyas. Anyway, let's just carry on. The sannyasis, speaking informally to groups here and there, would explain how the devotees had offended Prabhupada and how he had subsequently withdrawn his mercy. The sannyasis revealed their special insights that Prabhupada was actually God, that none of his disciples had recognized him as such, and that all of them, therefore, beginning with the sannyasis, were guilty of minimizing his position. And that was why Prabhupada had left for India. He had, quote unquote, withdrawn his mercy from his disciples. It's very unlikely that a spiritual master will do that. But it can happen and has happened. Yeah. Prabhupada rejected. I'm definitely aware of one who he definitely rejected. But it's really only if the disciple really becomes offensive and themselves rejects the spiritual master, even when oftentimes, if not that it happens much at all, but if it happens that a disciple rejects their spiritual master, then the spiritual master often will not reject the disciple because of kindness, but not just that, but because the spiritual master feels that the disciple can or could be reformed and doesn't want to sort of close the door on the disciple completely. Yeah. All right, so let's see. The devotees were devastated. None of them knew what to say in reply. The sannyasis, by their preaching, had projected gloom everywhere, which was proper, they said. Everyone should feel guilty and realize that they had lost the grace of their spiritual master. No use trying to cheer one another up by chanting Hare Krishna or eating a feast. Everyone should accept the bitter medicine. Although Prabhupada had given his disciples 3 volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam, as well as Bhagavad Gita as it is, the Nectar of Devotion, teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and other literature, none of the devotees, and I mean none, really, none, were well versed in them. Many devotees wondered if the philosophy the sannyasis were preaching was correct, but none of them knew enough of the scriptures to immediately refute it. The devotees turned to the new GBC men, Prabhupada's appointed leaders and guardians of ISKCON. The GBC, along with other senior devotees, began carefully searching through Prabhupada's books to ascertain exactly what he had said about the position of the spiritual master. Then Hayagriva announced that a letter had just arrived from Srila Prabhupada in Tokyo. As soon as the devotees all gathered under the pavilion roof to hear, Hayagriva read aloud, "My dear sons and daughters." And then Prabhupada listed almost all the New Vrindavan residents. The devotees immediately felt a wave of hope. Just to hear Prabhupada say, "My dear sons and daughters," was a great relief. Hayagriva continued to read, "Please accept my blessings." Prabhupada hadn't rejected them. The letter went on to say that Srila Prabhupada was pleased with the work of the New Vrindavan devotees, and he promised to come and visit them. Soon he would send for other devotees to join him in India, he said. As he described what preaching in India would be like, the devotees became caught up in the momentum of Srila Prabhupada's preaching spirit. They cheered. They felt blissful. Then Prabhupada specifically referred to the difficulty facing ISKCON. He said, "Purge out of New Vrindavan the non-Vrindavan atmosphere that has entered." Unquote. His letter turned the tide against the Mayavad teachings. The GBC then called a meeting of all disciples in the temple room, reading selections from the Nectar of Devotion. They established that the spiritual master, although not God, should be honored as much as God, because he is the confidential servant of God. Several senior devotees spoke their heart's convictions, citing examples from their association with Prabhupada to prove that he had not rejected them. He was too kind. The sannyasis might feel rejected because of their own guilt, someone said, but they should not project their guilt on others. The false teachings, however, had dealt a blow from which many devotees would need time to recover. Newcomers at the festival were especially unsettled, but the cloud of gloom that had hung over New Vrindavan now lifted, thanks to Srila Prabhupada's timely letter. The sannyasis admitted their confusion. The GBC then phoned Kirtanananda Swami in Tokyo and told him that Prabhupada's letter had resolved most of the problems, but that the sannyasis still held their misconceptions. Hearing this, Prabhupada felt his suspicions confirmed. Certain disciples had been contaminated by the poisonous philosophy from India. Consequently, material desires for power and control had overwhelmed them, even in Prabhupada's presence. Yeah, this is, in principle, this is, just in a very broad sense, this is really one of the most important points, just really one of the most, that we must not hear from the wrong sources. We must not hear from the wrong sources. Yeah. Because, sometimes, these devotees were sannyasis. Of course, they're new devotees actually. They are in their 20s, so they're new devotees, and they're just, when you're in your 20s, you're still a bit of a kid. I mean, let's face it, we've all been there. It's definitely true. It's definitely true. Nice kids, but still kids. Yeah. I remember when I was 18, it's something that struck in my mind, one of those experiences that stuck in my mind. I was 18. I was walking along the street in this little shopping area near where we lived, and some little child pointed at me for no important reason and said, "Mummy, look at this, look at that man." And I thought, oh yeah, I'm 18. I'm a man. And then I became a devotee. And I remember the first time I heard Srila Prabhupada say, you boys and girls. And I thought, what, boys and girls? I'm a man. I'm big time. Anyway. Oh. Yeah, but it's so important, and sometimes devotees get, go a little dilly and say some wrong things. It happens. I mean, when I say devotees, I mean including devotees living in the temple. It can happen, and it does happen. Anyway, I don't want to get into details, but it definitely can happen, and sometimes does happen. And if you all, us all, hear something which sort of, strikes you as, for example, I mean, even if it's just, it strikes you as something which the devotees, because I mean, you've all heard many classes. You've all heard many classes. So if someone in a class or any time says something that, Krishna consciousness means this and that, but you haven't heard it described like that before, then, it's not impossible that it could be valid. But if you hear something which is you've not heard before in classes, then ask someone senior. You can ask me when I'm here, but you can ask Swarup Damodar Prabhu. Yeah, I mean, he's the most, I would say, knowledgeable devotee here. And you'll get a good answer. And even if he can't, then, he can refer to me or Govardhan or Giriraj Maharaj. So then you can get clarification. So please bear that in mind, because like we just read here, that newcomers at the festival were especially unsettled. So devotees who are not so experienced, haven't been around so much, haven't read or heard so much, are definitely more easily unsettled. Back in 1982, just the day, or I think 2 days after Gaur Purnima, the then GBC and Guru, Jayatirtha, left ISKCON. And, for not good reason. I mean, there couldn't be a good reason, but for crazy reasons, actually. I don't know how many of you were around. You were around in those days? 82. Yeah. Were you around 82? Not so much. Anyway, you weren't around, were you? So, and he was, I think, in India. He was in India, yeah. He sent one of his disciples, like a fanatic, to South Africa to preach to the disciples to leave and join him. And they did. Not all. A few stayed. Shrutakirti, Jairadhika, Bimal Prasad. But listen to this. This is a good one. I don't know if you've ever heard this. Our temple in Cato Ridge went in 5 minutes, from about 45 devotees to less than 10 in 5 minutes. We've seen devotees, some devotees leave occasionally. There is a sort of rate of attrition, unfortunately. But, from 45, it came down to, I think, 9. 5 minutes. I was there. And they took all our vehicles. And we were there in Cato Ridge on the farm, which is, like at least a half-hour walk or an hour's walk up to the shops and where you could get anything. Oh, we had a tractor. They didn't take the tractor. But it was not a very good tractor. Anyway, they brought the vehicles back, I think not the next day, but the day after. But, how many of them came back to ISKCON? You remember Param, right, who passed away just quite recently? He came back. But, with all due respect, he remained a little sort of, something was not quite right. I mean, even, the whole time, after he'd come back, he was a good devotee. He was a really good devotee. Oh, and Shukadev, I don't know if you knew Shukadev, he just passed away, living up the way here. He passed away recently. He came back, but he came back and he got reinitiated, but after quite some time. And I don't know if you know Akinchana. She's in England. Huh? Yes, Akinchana Clark. She came back. But the rest, and here's another good one. We went from 64 Namahatas down to maybe 0 or maybe 1 or 2. Yeah, because they went on a mission to turn the whole community against the GBC, against the management, against anyone who was against Jayatirtha, because Jayatirtha, sure, he'd actually gone slightly insane, and he stayed insane until one of them murdered him. And you know Nandarani? Yes. Remember her? She's also, she's definitely gone. She's too mentally gone to come back. And it's all from the wrong philosophy, actually. And their philosophy was, you could say, even if the guru, someone who was the guru starts doing, like seriously non-guru things, which was basically what he had done, still he's your guru. You must follow him. So, gurus are generally the most senior and the most sort of stable and reliable and all that. They're meant to be, at least, for sure. But, sometimes it happens. Sometimes it happens. It has happened. And it's not just in ISKCON. It's not just in ISKCON. In all the different lines, every now and then someone sort of goes off track. Very rare, but it has happened. Anyway, sorry about that. But the point is, deviant philosophy and, all that sort of thing, watch out. Really. Watch out. And even, like the Gaudiya Math itself, they are the closest to us. They're closer than the other sampradayas, like the Sri Sampradaya. But they're philosophically, they're quite different from us, from Prabhupada, quite different. There are quite significant differences, put it that way. So anyway, if any of you, just speaking to you all, hear some devotee who you may even know saying some things, and you've not heard those things before, and so it strikes you, it's really important to get clarification, because otherwise you can end up in a really messed up state of consciousness. Yeah. So that was the bad news. Anyway, things are sort of looking up here to some degree. So, okay, turning to Tamal Krishna Sudama and the 3 sannyasis with him, because Tamal Krishna at this point was a householder, and Sudama, I guess, was a brahmachari. Prabhupada asked what they thought should be done with the previous day's philosophic drilling still sharp in their minds. Because, Prabhupada, what the previous day, got on their case and spent, I think, a couple of hours questioning them on their understanding of the philosophy. So with that philosophic drilling still sharp in their minds, they suggested that anyone teaching Mayavad philosophy should not be allowed to stay within ISKCON. Haribol. Anyway, they're new devotees, actually, but at least they sort of step by step they're getting there. Prabhupada agreed. If these sannyasis continued to preach Mayavad philosophy, Prabhupada said, they should not be allowed to stay in his temples, but should go out and, quote-unquote, preach on their own. Tamal Krishna conveyed this message to the GBC in the United States, and Prabhupada was satisfied that the problem would be adjusted. He had created his GBC to handle such matters. On September the 2nd, Prabhupada wrote Hansadutta in Germany, quote, regarding the poisonous effect in our society, it is a fact, and I know wherefrom this poison tree has sprung up, and how it affected practically the whole society in a very dangerous form. But it does not matter. Prahlad Maharaj was administered poison, but it did not act. Similarly, Lord Krishna and the Pandavas were administered poison, and it did not act. I think in the same parampara system that the poison administered to our society will not act if some of our students are as good as Prahlad Maharaj. I have therefore given the administrative power to the governing body commission. To Hayagriva in New Vrindavan, Prabhupada wrote, quote, I am very glad to know that the GBC is actively working to rectify the subversive situation which has been weakening the very foundation of our society. All you members of the GBC, please always remain very vigilant in this connection, so that our society's growth may go on unimpeded by such poisonous elements. Your preaching in New Vrindavan, as well as intensified study of our literatures with seriousness, is very much encouraging. Please continue this program with vigor and re-establish the solidity of our movement. From the beginning, I was strongly against the impersonalists, and all my books stressed on this point. You may know the story. It's a story I've told a number of times, and it's in the Lilamrita. I think it's in one of the biographies, maybe it's in the Lilamrita, that Srila Prabhupada, right in the beginning, where the oldest devotee's been a devotee 6 months at the most, or less, they noticed that Prabhupada is regularly, almost every class, he says something against the impersonalists and the Mayavadis. Almost every class, if not actually every class. And so the devotees were discussing it over prasadam. And and one of them said, yeah, he has a real problem with these impersonalists, these Mayavadis. And, I would have thought, the devotee said, I would have thought, if he wants to point out the faults with some group of people, why doesn't he point out the faults with the Christians? Because, America's a Christian country. Where are the Mayavadis? What difference will it make here to point out the faults of the Mayavadis and impersonalists? And so devotees were sort of agreeing, yeah, it's quite extraordinary. And then one of them said, I think I understand. Swamiji is an old man. And old people, they get, a bit cranky sometimes. So I think that maybe Swamiji had some big run-in with some impersonalist Mayavadi sometime, and now he's just got a bee under his bonnet about these people, and it just comes out regularly. Yeah, anyway, that was their really childish attempt to understand. Okay, so my oral instruction as well as my books are all at your service. Now you GBC consult them and get a clear and strong idea. Then there'll be no more disturbance. The 4 sannyasis may bark, but still the caravan will pass. Because Prabhupada would quote a famous saying, the caravan means of camels. Well, the dogs may bark, but the caravan passes. Prabhupada wrote Satsvarupa in Boston, quote, I'm very glad to know that you are not affected by the propaganda of the sannyasis, that I am displeased with all the members of the society. I am never displeased with any member. Unquote. The worst was over, Prabhupada thought. For months, this problem had upset him and his writing. Relentlessly, he had instructed his disciples for their own benefit and for the benefit of his movement. The disease had taken its toll, and that was unfortunate. But the devotees were being forced to turn to Prabhupada's books and apply their teachings, and that was the positive outcome. Now they should clearly understand the position of the spiritual master and never again be led astray by false philosophies or sentiment. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Any comment or question? Yes. One moment. Oh. Yeah. Give it to her. Go ahead. Take the mic.
How responsible should a disciple be towards his Gurudev and vice versa? To what degree of responsibility and commitment in either way?
Well, I mean, in principle, the basic idea, of course, is completely. Yeah. Well, that's the answer. Yeah.
And Gurumaharaj, if the disciple passes away, then and if he didn't do so well in his spiritual life, and then he comes back, how does the spiritual master carry
You know, Krishna is a very clever person. He'll work things out. And, you know, in that regard, there's the story of Bilvamangal Thakur, you know. His spiritual master, what was his name? I forget his name. But anyway, his spiritual master spoke to him, preached to him through the mouth of the prostitute, Chintamani. Yeah, instructed him. And he left everything on the spot and went to Vrindavan. So one way or another, by Krishna's arrangement. Yeah. The mechanics of it, we shouldn't really worry about too much.
I was just thinking that these deviant philosophies has such an effect on people who hear them. You know, that these devotees have actually lost their minds. I know Nandarani, and I've seen her. She has come to the temple a few times.
Yeah.
And it's like so sad. I was just wondering, we get devotees who have lost their minds also. Is that due to offenses, or is that, I'm not sure.
It's usually, you know, if someone was sane, but then they become insane, a devotee, it's usually due to offenses. Because I knew her before, of course. I was the temple president. She was in the ladies' Sankirtan party, and she was really a good girl. She really was. And you know this Japamala who comes, he was a good brahmachari. I knew him extremely well. He was very good, Sankirtan devotee. But now, you know, I mean, he's one of the better of them, put it that way. But he's a little, you know, otherwise also. He is, yeah. But he's the best of a pretty bad lot, unfortunately, yeah. Usually due to offenses. Okay. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.